Welcome to the Bear's Lair, where we're going to be diving in to a little TikTok that I ended up posting a little bit earlier of our special project that we were working on. What was that project? Why were we doing it? Well, I have the answers for you, and it's going to lead into a deck tech. That's right, we're going to be diving into the world of the Magic of the Gathering, where we're going to have a deck tech for this weekend's special event. What's that event? Well, I'm glad we asked, because we're going to slide on over and show her in three, two, one, bam. That's right, we're going to be covering over Magic Presents Pride Returns June 2026, and it comes with a new promo card. That's not what I'm super worried about. I mean, well, while we're right here, we might as well go over it. So the promo card is going to be Gilded Lotus, 5 mana, tap it for 3 of 1 color mana. But the big thing about this event is that we get to pick any 2 legal commanders. Any 2 legal commanders. Pair them up and express your pride in a way that's unique to you. If you're looking for ideas, here's a favorite couple. So they end up coming up with a couple of them. So what does that lead into? Well, my favorite couple is going to end up being Kudo, and I'm going to have to find her real quick. Boop. And Hula. So the big thing about Moxfield is that they don't end up having a way to pair it, or I don't know how to make a pairing with it, because this is a special event. You notice these don't have pairings, but with this special event, that allows us to be able to have different pairings. So what I ended up brewing up was a rebuild of my favorite deck. I love Kudo. I love Alula. Alula, Bear Force 1, always going to be a deck in my heart. Always going to have it. That is my pet little deck that I have. Ever since I saw it over on, I believe it was Game Nights with... All right, we had a little snafu with the recording. But we're back. We're at it. I was able to find a different way to make the partner setup. So we now have the partner set up on our deck list. That's right. Also, this is from the future where we ended up going over and missing this event, but that's okay. We're going to still dive in, go through a deck tech, and maybe you can end up talking to him over at the first iteration that you end up talking over at the Rule 0, be able to figure out all the different things that goes on with that. So, enough talking. Let's dive in. Immediately, we're going to go to the lands. Why is the lands? Because we're going to get the slowest and the worst thing over with, because I know you're not interested in it. You're more interested in the creatures and all the other shenanigans. So, let's get this started. Hargoth, Sanctum of Nature, Bountiful Promenade, Canopy Vista, Castle Garenbrig, Command Tower, Ancestral Hith, Forest. I believe we have 6 of those bad boys all together. Fortified Village, Gavany Township, Manice Tith, Mosswort Bridge, Nixos, Shrine to Nyx, Oran Reef, the Vastwood, Overgrown Farmland, Path to Ancestry, Plains, which we also have 6 of those, Plaza of Heroes, Razor Verge Thicket, Rogue's Passage, Celestia Sanctuary, Sungrass Prairie, Temple Garden, 3 Tree City, Windswept Heath, Yavimai's Corella Growth, and that rocks out the entire area of lands. So, where we go from the lands? Well, we'll go sorceries! Yahoo! So we have Pest Infestation, where we end up making a whole bunch of little bears, because they're little green insect tokens, but with Kudo, it's bears. Awaken of the Woods, Finale of Devastation. So this is a way that we can end up tutoring up anything that we end up needing to grab. This has a way that we can end up making a whole lot of bears and be able to dig this out from not just our library, but from our graveyard as well. Plus, it can end up giving a good buff if we go 10 or more. Nature's Rhythm, more tutoring. and Mutables United, aka Triumph the Hordes. Good way to end the games has Infect, and if you don't know about Infect, you only have to do 10 damage to an opponent to be able to kill them. Gains Trample and gives us a +1/+1 counter across the board. Okay. Get off that. And now we'll go instances with Path to Exile. See if we can fix it. Nope, we didn't fix it. Okay. Secured the Wastes, making more 1/1 warrior creature tokens with our bears. Teflar Stand, Indestructible, and we can end up buffing up one of our commanders to instantly win. Worldly Tutor, more tutoring. Only it puts on top of the deck instead of onto the battlefield. Don's Truce, Indestructible. It'll end up giving it a permanent you control gain hexproof until end of turn. If a gift was promised, permanents you control are indestructible until end of turn. And of course, we end up having Heroic Intervention, which is the green copy of that. Grand Casindo ends up making a whole bunch of more tokens, and it gives our creatures indestructible. Chord of Calling, another tutor, and March of their Multitudes. More tokens. We end up making more tokens because the main mission that we're going to end up making is making a whole lot of bears. Woohoo! Jumping over to the artifacts, we have Soul Ring. Classic in pretty much most of your decks. Arcane Signet. I love this because this looks like Thanos' glove. Herd Heirloom. That gives Trample, and we can end up using this to be able to cast creature spells. But like I said, you can tap it, give Trample to something that has a power of 4 or more, and draw a card whenever it does damage. Draw a card's awesome in this deck. It's awesome in any deck. Swiftfoot Boots gives us a little hasty and a little hexproof. And final artifact is the Immortal Sun. Creatures you get +1/+1. Creatures cost 1 colorless less, and at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional cards. Players can't activate Planeswalker or Planeswalker loyalty abilities. So that's a little sub-thought that comes with it. We mainly got it in here because A, you draw more cards, B, it costs us less to be able to cast those creatures, and C, we end up having a nice little boost for it. Enchantment-wise, we have Hardened Scales, more +1/+1 counter shenanigans. Anthem of the Champions gives +1/+1. Branching Evolution ends up making a whole bunch more counters. So whenever we put like 2 +1/+1 counters on there, instead we put 4. Fight Rigging, we end up putting a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. If we have a power of 7 or greater, we may cast that spell without paying that mana cost. How is this happening? Well, we have Hideaway 5 when it comes into play. That means when we end up playing this, we end up looking at the top 5 cards, put one face down, and then as soon as we fulfill that power of 7 or greater, we can be able to cast that without paying its mana cost. Growing Rights of Iklomok. This will allow us to end up going over looking for a creature card from among them, which looks at the top 4 cards and put a creature into our hand. And then at the beginning of our end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform it. What does it transform into? Well, Iklomok, Cradle of the Sun. It taps for 1 green mana, or it taps for 1 green mana for each creature that you control. You can get really out of hand with this deck. Guardian Project, more drawing, more going on. So we end up drawing more cards. Landing Zone is a more +1/+1 counters. Another version of Branching Evolution. It's important to say with Guardian Project, it is the non-tokens. So the non-tokens is the ones that we end up drawing from. So, bread and butter time. You ready for it? Here comes your steady diet of a bunch of animals, or creatures, or whatever you want to call it. We're going to start off with Evanson's Program. That's right. It's a little mana dork that taps for our planes. Birds of Paradise taps for any color. Abyss Mystic taps for a green. And honestly, remember, with Kudo out there, all these guys become bears. When or elves? Oh, I jumped over Farhaven elves. Basculus brew scale. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Dust Shell Crawler ends up giving creatures with a +1/+1 cramp with a +1/+1 counter trample. So we want trampling damage. Grand Abolisher. You can't play spells during my turn. Intrepid Adversary. More +1/+1 shenanigans. And if we need to drop a bunch of mana into it, we could end up paying this little extra cost. Yes, it's a white, but hey, we can always end up dropping right into it. Luminarch Aspirant ends up putting a +1/+1 counter on a target creature that we control at the beginning of our combat on our turn. So it's another enabler for putting more +1/+1 counters on there. Metallic Mimic will end up putting bear, and we'll end up putting an additional +1/+1 counter on whenever a bear comes in the battlefield. Voice of Victory, no shenanigans, plus it makes more bears. Bearific. Adeline, Replant Cathar, power is equal to the number of creatures you control. So it gets a star, so that ends up bumping off the top of everything that we end up having. Yeah, we set it over at a 2/2, but then it becomes a 2/2 with that buff. Whenever you attack, each opponent create a 1/1 white human / bear creature token that's tapped and attacking planeswalkers or player that they control. What? Wow, I stumbled way over that. Arwen, Weaver of Hope. We end up putting more +1/+1 counters. Kadar, Caller of the Small, ends up putting rabbit tokens. That's right, rabbit tokens whenever it deals combat damage. And that is going to be for the amount of code token creatures that we control. So we're heavily into the token base that comes over with it. Champion of Lambholt, finisher. Straight up finisher. Because creatures that have less than the power of Champion Lambholt can't block it, or block creatures that you control. So, with how many creatures we're going to end up making and generating, guess what? We're going to make this thing huge to be able to walk in there and not have to them doing anything about it. Enduring Innocence is an enchantment creature. Starts off with a creature, but when it dies, it becomes an enchantment. And when anything has a power of 2 or less enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. It's limited once, but hey. Kami of the Whispered Hopes. It's one of those that we end up putting more +1/+1 counters, because whenever we put one more on each time that we end up doing it. Plus, it also taps for mana. King Dorian is a good way to be able to sacrifice to give our creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and it gives a +1/+1 counters over to it. If we get bold, we can pay 5 to be able to put a +1/+1 counter on the king to be able to trigger off those bonuses that we end up doing, and we end up making another bear. Kidama of the West Tree, we end up ramping with this guy whenever a modified creature deals combat damage to a player. Search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. And it also gives them trample. So a big thing that I would suggest, that I'm just looking at this with having only 12 basic lands, is to put more basic lands into this. I think the lands that come into play tapped, I think we're going to end up cutting those and put more basic lands into it, to be able to have more triggers that comes over with that. Katzul says no to casting spells during our turns. But we also have it whenever each creature with a power greater than its base power deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. So a little bit more pseudo draw feel that we end up needing. Torns, the Fist of the Angels, has training. So that means whenever a creature attacks with another creature power With greater power, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to create a 1/1 white human creature token with training. So they also have training on top of that. Welcoming Vampire is more draw fuel that we can end up doing. Also, it's a flying bear. Beast Whisper, more draw fuel that comes over with that. Morale, the Shield of Argoth. No, it says no casting spells, activate abilities, artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So you can't end up doing that stuff. But when it attacks, we get to create X amount of 1/1 colors soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers that you control. So it gets crazy and ends up making a whole lot more bears. Ouroboros is another way that ends up putting a bunch of +1/+1 counters on creatures, because at the beginning of combat, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature where is that creature's power. So we end up doubling our power. Shaili, Voice of Plenty, is another way to give us hexproof and our creatures hexproof. And also, when we have all that mana, we can dump it right here to put that +1/+1 counters into it. Sovereign Atnak is another amazing creature to be able to give more +1/+1. So for each of them, we end up putting more +1/+1 counters to creatures that have a different power than what they end up having. So what's going to be happening with this is going to be setting that completely up for it. Timeless Witness is another way to be able to get a card from our graveyard to our hand. And then we also have Eternize, where we can end up playing it from the graveyard, bringing it back, something where it becomes a 4/4 black zombie shaman. Toski. Whenever a creature deals combat damage, draw a card. It's a nice little squirrel. Yasharn. So this is another one that's very interesting. Players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. Also, it lets us look for a basic forest and a basic plains, reveal them, and put them into our hands. So we have ramp, and we got a thing that makes it so we can't sacrifice for any of the other stuff that goes along with that. Super, super awesome that comes with that. Definitely an underrated card. Defiler of Vigor allows our green creatures to cost 1 less for whenever we pay life. And whenever we do that, we get to cast a green permanent. We get to put a +1/+1 counter on each. That's right, each creature. Maja, Bagard Protector. Other creatures get +1/+1. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, we get to create a 1/1 human creature token. Sagara, host of Herons, flying, hexproof, spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. That's right, Black, you can't cause us to sacrifice anything. We like it that way. Vigor. So whenever we do combat damage and they block it, it's not the end of the world because that combat damage is prevented and we get to put more +1/+1 counters on it. So essentially, we grow and we grow and we grow. Oh yeah, and we grow. The strongest will survive. Alice Norn. I know this has a whole bunch of texts over here, but it says creatures that we control get +2/+2. But creatures that our opponents control get -2/-2. Keep that one in the little back of the head because we'll talk about that later as well when we cover some combos that we have with the deck. And the finisher that we have is Craterhoof Behemoth. That's right, you normally find it in elves, but whenever you need a finisher and you're in green, you can always sub this guy in. because when it enters the battlefield, creatures gain trample. They get +X+X, what is the number of creatures that we control. Well, how many creatures are we can end up making with this deck? It's going to be a monstrous, and it makes everyone monstrous. All right, so we end up having that going on. Let's talk about a couple combos. So Kudo makes everything into a bear, a 2/2 bear, right? That's right. Ayula, well, makes everything into a, before I go to Ayula, let's end up talking about this real quick. The combo that we have just with Kudo is going to be Elish Norn, because Elish Norn makes everyone's creatures be a power toughness of a 2/2. So that means if they play something and Elish Norn's out there, it's going to die unless they have a static of ability of a +1/+1. And, well, I guess if they gain +1/+1 counters, that won't end up working for it, because I would already have to be on the battlefield for that +1/+1 counter to be put on there. So anything that they end up playing that's a 2/2 will immediately die. So that's a combo that we end up having with the deck. And the second combo deals with 3 cards. Kudo, King Among Bears, Ayula, and the final piece is Basking Brewscale. Why is that? Well, Basking Brewscale has this thing that whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, you may create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token, sacrifice this to add 1 colorless. So one colorless is nice and everything, but with Kudo out there, everything is a bear. So when we play this, it's a bear. Ayula ends up putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Boop, boop. There we end up going, and this goes infinitely. We end up making a whole bunch more bears, because whenever we put a counter on this, we end up putting a bear into play and keep on going. So we can end up using this to make one big gigantic bear to be able to swing into, or we could be fighting stuff that goes along with it, or we have other ways that we can end up putting counters onto it to be able to get this going. So this is kind of crazy how that ends up working. And it honestly is the first time of us having that combo that's going to be in this deck. I feel like this is the perfect home for it, because you end up having Kudo that allows you to make this into a bear to be able to have that trigger with Ayula. So that is Barely There 2.0. So that's where we end up having this deck. I have to say, it's a very bearable deck, and you can become a Grizzly veteran with however you end up playing it. If you end up playing this and you can't rule 0 in where you have partner commanders, or you can't go to the event that makes you have a legendary commander that can end up, or 2 legendary commanders that can be partnered up, a good way of doing it is have a few more tutors and run, obviously, Kudo, because that's the coloring that you end up needing, and tutor out Ayula as quick as you can to be able to bring this into battlefield. Ayula and Kudo are a good combination to be able to have. Also, another thing I would suggest if you're doing that thing is to make sure that you have more ways to be able to dig stuff out from your graveyard. Why is that? Because honestly, either way, these guys are going to be the lightning rods of damage and being taken out. So you want to make sure that you either have more protection or ways to be able to bring that more over to your hand. It's a little bit easier because you have Kudo that could be in your command zone, but Ayula, you gotta make sure that you end up having that. Solid way to go with it. Another direction that you could go is +1/+1 counters, or not +1/+1 counter, but +1/+1 buffs overall. That's another good way. Or a big way that you can end up dropping out of here is drop the token generation and end up being able to slide in those pieces that you're looking for. What did you think of the deck? Let us know down in the comments down below. And as always, if you're liking the content we're putting out, like, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to be notified whenever I come out with new content. And thank you for watching. And until next time, this is the Bear's Lair, and that was Barely There.